Hi, good evening, everyone. I am McKenna. I'm the owner of Murder by the Book in Houston, Texas, and I am very excited tonight to be joined by two of my favorite authors and people, Laura Lippman and Dan Fesperman. Many of you have watched a lot of our virtual events and know that you can find our schedule on murderbooks.com, or you can find it on the Facebook event listing. And tomorrow night I'll be back on here with Liv Constantine, the two sisters who make up Liv Constantine, in conversation with KJ Howell. I'll be back at 1 o'clock. And I think we've got about 20 authors next week as usual. So make sure to check out murderbooks.com for our upcoming virtual events. We also have a pretty cool subscription box plan. People seem to be loving Murder by the Box. You can find information about that at murderbythebox.com. There's a best of the month subscription, Cozy Corner subscription, and Crime Fiction Legends. So a little bit of something for everyone. And we always say they make great gifts. Okay, so for those of you who are watching, if you have questions, make sure to put those in the live chat on YouTube or in the comments on Facebook, and I will be back on in a little bit to get to those. There's no such thing as a dumb question. Sorry, my dog is stealing the show right now, but she'll settle shortly. Anyway, as I mentioned, it's a great pleasure to have these two people joining us. I'm going to start with Dan Fesperman. Let's get him out here. Hi, Dan.
Hi, good to see you, McKenna.
Good to see you too. Let me do your official bio real quick. Dan Fesperman's travels as a journalist and novelist have taken him to 30 countries and 3 war zones. Lie in the Dark won the Crime Writers Association of Britain's John Creasey New Blood Dagger Award for Best First Crime Novel. The Small Boat of Great Sorrows won their Ian Fleming Steel Dagger Award for Best Thriller, and The Prisoner of Guantánamo won the Hammett Prize from the International Association of Crime Writers. He lives in Baltimore, and tonight he's here to discuss The Cover Wife, which is his brand new book. Thank you again for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
All right, and you are going to be in conversation with Laura Lippman. Hi, Laura.
Hey.
So good to see you. I miss seeing you in person, but at least we get to chat this way.
Yeah, miss you too, McKenna. We'll see each other face to face soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so here's your official bio. Since her debut in 1997, Laura Lippman has been hailed as a distinctive voice in crime fiction. Recently named one of the essential crime writers of the last 100 years, she has produced 24 novels, a book of short stories, a collection of essays, and a children's picture book, and been published in more than 25 languages. A New York Times bestseller, she's also won more than 20 prizes for her work and been shortlisted for 30 more. Her 2019 novel, Lady in the Lake, will be produced as a television series starring Natalie Portman and Lupita Nyong'o. Lippman also lives in Baltimore and New Orleans, and she's here tonight to talk about Dream Girl. Okay, that's enough out of me. I'm going to sit back and listen to the two of you, and I'll be back on in a little bit with questions. I already put the link in the comments. So for more information about both authors or to order books, the link is in the comments, both here on Facebook and YouTube. All right. Have fun.
Okay.
Hello, hey, Laura. Good to see you.
Good to see you. The Cover Wife just came out this week, right?
Yeah, it just came out on Tuesday. And Dream Girl came out, June 22nd, right?
Yes, 2 weeks ago. So, well, I loved Cover Wife.
Oh, thank you. I love Dream Girl. It's just a wonderful ride. And as usual, even apart from the great characters and plot, your prose is so wonderful that I love to just wallow in it. It's just great. So
I want to just jump right in talking about Cover Wife because okay, no spoilers, obviously.
Right.
This is a book set in 1999 that involves U.S. espionage centered in Hamburg, Germany, around an Al-Qaeda cell.
Yeah.
And it involves a woman who's posing as somebody's wife, Claire.
Yes.
And so I want you to talk about, I know people always think this is such a cliched question, but I think it's a great question. I need to know where the idea for this book came from because I'm kind of fascinated and obsessed by that. Like the idea, first of all, for that time and place, but also for the more specific idea of a woman working undercover, pretending to be somebody's wife.
Yeah, I wanted to write about this group of guys in Hamburg who the CIA was keeping track of at the time, but somehow lost track of. And anyone who sees their names will recognize who they are if they're a student of history of that period. So I'm not too worried about spoilers about this group, which became known as the so-called Hamburg Cell. But I always wanted to write about that and what could have happened, and a little bit of speculative fiction as well about that, because there are a lot of gaps. It's kind of known how they lost track, but not really. But the way Claire Saylor entered into it, that was not originally in my plans. She had been sort of a sidekick in my previous novel, Safe Houses. And she wasn't even intended to be really a sidekick in that when I set out to write it. And the more I wrote her into scenes, the more I sort of enjoyed writing her as a character. I had done a lot of research about CIA and its treatment of women, and women trying to get into the field in that era, which was 1979, much more difficult. But even by 1999, they did not have this prominent role in jobs out in the field. The ones who were there tended to feel kind of underappreciated. Sometimes, the expectations were low. So that's kind of how Claire ended up in this book. I felt like I wasn't done, and I wanted to make her the main character in this book.
So here's the thing. How do you research espionage novels? It should be hard. It should be difficult, right?
It is. It is.
How to figure this out. And yet, I'm convinced that you know everything about how to take CIA.
Well, I'm glad you've been fooled by my ignorance, but you talk to a lot of people. It's amazing when people get out of the CIA. They're often very talkative if they know that you're somebody who can keep a secret, if they know that it helps that I'm writing fiction, because they get around it the same way. When spies write books, if they write a memoir or a true account, they just get redacted to pieces. When they write novels, it just breezes on through. Even though they'll have thinly disguised real operations, they'll change names, they find that it's much easier to tell the truth about what they've done in fiction than nonfiction. So I kind of have the same advantage when I'm talking to them.
Right. I mean, I found that in general as a novelist. I mean, we're both, for people who don't know, we're both former journalists. We work together at the Baltimore Sun. People are so happy to talk to novelists in a way that we're happy to talk to reporters. They're like, sure, I'll tell you anything.
Yeah, and here's a story you can use. And it's just where if you were a reporter, like you said, they'd be doing the sign of the cross and keeping you away.
But it's such an interesting choice because we know how things turned out.
Yeah.
We know that.
Yeah.
I mean, the book is amazingly suspenseful.
Oh, thank
you. Book where the bigger story is known.
Yeah.
But we're totally sucked into the immediate story of Claire, the other people that she's working with, the job that she's on.
Yeah.
And the concerns that arise. I'm trying to be very spoiler-free right now. The concerns that arise as they begin to focus in on this particular cell.
Yeah.
And I was just so fascinated by that because it's almost counterintuitive how suspenseful your book is.
Oh, well, thanks.
And you must have thought a lot about the fact that people know the big story of 9/11. I can't change it.
Right.
But I can make people care about the fall of 1999 in Hamburg, Germany.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm glad it worked for you, because that was a concern, because I thought, well, they're going to see this name. One of the guys is named Mohammed Atta, and anybody who knows anything about 9/11 is going to say, oh, that guy. And I was worried. I had a talk with my editor. He said, do you really want to put his name in? Can't you just keep using his nickname, which was Amir? And I said, no, because anybody who knows about the Hamburg cell is going to recognize these people anyway. And anybody who doesn't, and maybe that triggers it. I said, that's not my point of the book, is not to say this horrible thing is going to happen and maybe we can stop it, because people will know it's not going to be stopped. It's more about the dynamics of these people and what's going to become of them and how they will succeed, fail, disappear, or whatever. So
it's fascinating because, I mean, I think about this all the time. I think about what is actually suspense.
Yeah.
What makes a story suspenseful?
Yeah.
And of course, the basic thing is you don't know what's going to happen next. And you might know what happened on 9/11, but you don't know in this world what's going to happen day to day. And I won't spoil it. No. I'll be very discreet. You totally had me there was a character that I loved so much, and I thought he was a goner.
Yeah.
Thought, oh no,
Yeah.
this person, no.
Yeah.
And then there was a character who was killed, and it was super, super sad. It was just like, oh, I'm so, I mean, I think one thing that I never get over is no matter how much I write, I'm still a reader.
Mm-hmm.
And I still enter into books in this very whole-spirited, wholehearted way.
Yeah.
As in, like, I'm yours. It's like, I'm just here for the story, and I'm here for these characters. And it doesn't matter that I do this. Although I guess what I should say is that I know that I'm reading a good book when I'm not do you feel it's like if I'm dissecting the mechanics of a story, it's probably not very good.
And we tend to try to do that as writers. We're always looking for that. And so if you can sneak one by us, then that's really something, which is why I really loved, what you have going here in Dream Girl works on so many different levels, because first off, you really have the writer's tortured mentality. Perfect. As much as you like or dislike Jerry, it's like every writer has a lot of these emotions that he's got, what the small and the large. And it's just a wonderful look at that and that mentality. But it's also, what I love too that in your book is there is so much, you talk about basically the cultural noise from everything, from all influences, from other books, from movies, from television, and there are references in there. And it's funny because I found myself, when you got to the one that you had mentioned Monty Python, but then you have a reference where it's from the Bring Out Your Dead scene. and I was celebrating. I was going, yes, it kind of gets to the heart of this thing of, even in dialogue, even from scene to scene, it's often so hard to maintain originality because you have all these influences, you have all these voices and characters of everything you've ever seen or read in your head. And it inevitably comes out. Because I remember you had a Scrooge reference. I've had a Scrooge reference. I think everybody at one time or another has called someone the founder of the feast in their book. It's a bad guy. And but I love that. I loved all that richness of that detail.
Or actually that line of, I think so many people have echoed the line, Marley was dead.
Yes, and that's,
I think so many people, I'm pretty sure I read the plot this spring, and I'm pretty sure that's in there too. So-and-so is dead to begin with. It's a great line. Yeah, I mean, writers' minds are kind of a hodgepodge.
Yeah.
And you sort of tap into it, and when you begin to admit to all your influences, and what matters to you, and what books matter, and what movies matter, and what you're always thinking about. I mean, for me, it was this interesting balancing act, writing about someone whom I don't like very much. I don't like Jerry Anderson.
Right.
But I agree with him on quite a few things. I feel like, oh, well, Jerry's completely right about that. About small things, not about, he's a misogynist. He's a lot of bad things. But when it comes to language and storytelling and what really matters, I'm kind of like, in Dream Girl, a big part of the argument is, can't we just make all this stuff up?
Yeah.
Do we have to embed? How much research do we have to do? Okay, so let's talk about this. Because I have to think, and I could be wrong though, I think you must do a lot of research. I don't see how you do your books without a ton of research. Yeah. But maybe it's just enough. How much do you do?
Exactly. And we're all thieves of real life experiences. I stole all this material from Hamburg. And we're all thieves of things that we see happen to our friends, or of dialogue we hear in the streets. We hear a line and it's like, oh, that's mine now. And we're all stealing stuff from our lives, other people's lives, history, real events from the papers. it is an act of theft in a lot of ways, even though it's not plagiarism. It's just, we're borrowing from every source we can find.
Well, I mean, this is super timely, but only if you're maybe on Twitter. I don't know if you know about the latest wrinkle in the story Cat Person, or do you know the story Cat Person?
I don't.
So Cat Person was a story that was published in the New Yorker right after Me Too revved up, and it became viral. It became huge. It's a story about a woman, college age, having a romance with a slightly older guy, maybe 15 years older.
Yeah.
And yesterday, a woman published an essay in Slate saying, this is my life. And she had sort of reported out the fact that the writer of this story had, in fact, been writing about her ex-boyfriend, who has since died, which makes it all. And, so the internet yesterday, Twitter yesterday was like,
yeah.
People were arguing like, it's fair, it's unfair, they stole her life. And of course, I'm kind of like, well, it's what we do.
Yeah,
I don't even know how to, I mean, we all know that Joan Didion famously said that journalists couldn't justify what they did.
Right.
I mean, fiction writers too?
Yeah. I mean, she called writing an act of betrayal, basically. Yes. And
but I don't feel guilty of it.
No, I don't either. And especially when you look at, I mean, at least we're not out there, another writer who you referenced, at least neither of us is out there like Phillip Roth, sort of, inviting scrutiny of our families the way his novels did. But and he writes about the reaction too in his subsequent novels. So.
Yeah, Roth gets like more and more meta.
Yeah,
he's taking down ex-wives, and Zuckerman Unbound was a really important influence.
Yeah,
in Dreamgirl,
and also the anatomy lesson too. There was.
Yeah. Oh God. I mean, it's interesting because. So I had a chance to meet Phillip Roth, and I did not take it.
Oh, really?
Because this would have been about 4 years ago, right before David started working on Plot Against America.
Yeah.
He went up to New York, and I have never been shy about meeting famous people I really want to meet. I met Tony Bourdain. Strangely, they're all the famous people I want to meet are like chefs. It's like Bourdain. I met Tom Colicchio. I met David Chang. I met Eric Rivera. I guess I like men who cook. But with Phillip Roth, I love Phillip Roth. He's one of the most important writers of my life. I have no desire to meet him.
Why do you think that? Why is that?
Because I don't think he's a nice person.
Yeah, I don't either. But and you think it would just ruin your enjoyment of his work if you did?
Yeah, I think it's hard enough as a woman to sort of balance your love of Roth with what I think is a palpable misogyny.
Yeah.
It's like, so I'm a huge fan of this essay that was written by Mary Gordon called Good Boys and Dead Girls.
Oh, yeah, that was mentioned in there too.
Yeah, I love this essay. And she talks about reading Faulkner, Dreiser, and Updike.
Yeah.
She talks about this theme in American literature in which good men are liberated by the death of women. And she looks at Light and August, American Tragedy, and the Rabbit books. And then she says, she's like, so how do we read problematic people? And what she suggests is that you just decide for yourself, are the pleasures of these problematic writers great enough for you?
Yeah.
As long as you understand they're problematic, that they're not truth tellers, that they will show you a fetid swamp and tell you it's a waterfall. Like for her, she jettisoned Updike. I love the Rabbit books.
Yeah, I do too.
And I was like, how could you? I mean, like, it's like, okay, fine. You don't love them. And she had a lot of fun with him. And I feel the same way about Roth.
Yeah.
I love Roth. But to read Roth as a person, as I would like to say, as a open-minded person in 2021.
Yeah.
There are problems.
Oh, yeah, and you cringe. But to me, the saving grace in reading Roth, even now, is that at least for me, I always get this sense that he knows he's a cad, and it comes out. It's sort of this all right, so yeah, I'm pretty bad. Whereas, say with Jerry, it's like Jerry is self-justifying, and Jerry thinks I'm not at all like my father when he's repeating all his father's mistakes. And as a certain private investigator who he tried to hire says, you're constantly lying to yourself, and he is. Whereas I think Roth, to a certain, he's also trying to do a lot of self-justification, but he's also, I think, doing a lot of confessional, like, yeah, this is how I've led my life, and it's not pretty.
So, okay, so this is what's interesting to me, which is that, I mean, you actually have several major characters moving through your story, but I keep thinking of it as Claire's book.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's the cover wife. She is the cover wife. So Claire is someone who bends the rules, does things that she's not supposed to do, but it's impossible for the reader to think that she's anything but right.
Right.
That her heart is always in the right place. Mm-hmm. Like, so this is what's interesting to me about, if we're going to look at Claire versus Jerry. Yeah. Claire is someone who understands herself as a rule breaker, as a person who will get into trouble because she will war with the directives of this very rigid bureaucracy in which she finds herself.
Right.
But she has to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Jerry is someone who thinks he's always right. He thinks he's a good person. And I think the most dangerous people in the world are people who think that they're good.
Yeah.
And I think that for me, that's a hangover from our newspaper days. Like, the biggest scoundrels in the city were people who presented themselves as heroes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And Claire doesn't present herself as a hero. She's just like, she kind of reminds me a little bit of Holly Hunter in broadcast news. I'm so fascinated in that moment in broadcast news where the Holly Hunter character is asked, it must be terrible, or it must be wonderful to think you're always the smartest person in the room.
Yeah.
No, it's terrible.
Yeah. And
I feel like that's a Claire thing, which is, it's terrible.
Especially if you're among idiots, but anyway.
I mean,
Claire gets away with that too. The reason I think Claire feels like she can act that way is she's able to do so partly because her bosses don't tend to pay much attention to her because they expect so little of her and kind of give her assignments, except Paul Bridger in the book. He has worked with her before. He knows her strengths. He also knows that if left to her own devices, she will push the envelope. That's precisely why he picks her and doesn't tell her and figures she's going to figure this out and get me what I need without me having to even ask. So it's at least one of her bosses is kind of onto her in that way. But the rest of the hierarchy basically think this is somebody who will give these lousy little jobs no one else wants, and we don't even have to watch her because it's so inconsequential. And so she makes the most of that. Whereas I think Jerry, I got the idea that when he was a suffering son, and his father left, and he was outraged by that, and it was a very tough childhood, even though it turned him into his father in some ways. I wonder if Jerry hadn't become famous, if he might have been redeemable, if the fame didn't sort of make him, all right, now because I'm in the spotlight, now because I'm regarded, I have to justify everything about myself, even to myself. But
I like that idea, but I think also for Jerry, it's not so much the fame, it's that, and this is where I know I'm talking about myself. I won't speak for you. As a writer, my worst tendency is I can't stop creating narrative. So there are people in my life where I sort of like write their story and I'm like, this is your story. And the problem with that is that they're still alive. Their story is not over.
Yeah.
You can't treat your friends and your family as books that you can like sort of, okay, here you go. Here's your 3 acts. I've solved you. I'm shelving you. And I know that I have done that to some friends, and I've had to confront that. And Jerry can't stop telling other people's stories and believing that he knows them better.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whether it's his mom or his friends or his young students, his wives, he just keeps shelving people.
Yeah.
And they're done. When he's done with them, they're done. That's a terrible thing about writers.
Which comes back to really bite him because he doesn't even recognize them when they're done.
Maybe pay closer attention.
Yeah, maybe. So, but no.
What are you working on now?
Oddly enough, usually I'm way behind, but this time it took so long due to COVID and slow down with editing on this book. It took me a lot longer to do all the finishing than I wanted. So I actually just turned in a first draft of my next book, which Claire will also be in that. I think this is the last book she'll be in. But this was really poorly planned on my part, because if you look at the 3 books she was in, book 1 was parts 1 and 4. This book was part 3, and the one I just turned in is part 2. So, it's hopelessly out of sequence.
So we're going to see Claire between Safe Houses and Cover
We'll
White.
see Claire in 1990, about 4 months after the Berlin Wall came down, and she'll be having equal billing. In fact, I think you can argue that she'll be somewhat overshadowed by an East German character who is with foreign intelligence with the Stasi, and his whole world has crumbled. He's been locked out of his office after the wall came down. He's about to get his last paycheck. He's worried about being prosecuted by the West Germans because of his success. And he has fled up north of Berlin to his dacha, where Marcus Wolf, this super spy for them, also has his dacha. And he's kind of gone into seclusion to wait and see what's going to happen while the CIA and the KGB start jockeying for all of their records and this huge marketplace of Stasi information that was suddenly available. So,
I mean, when you started out, wait a minute, I'm going to get it's Small Boat of Sorrows, the first book. I'm so bad at
book, but with the first character, the second book. Yeah.
Okay, what's the first book? I'm going to
Lie in the Dark.
Lie in the Dark, Small Boat of Sorrows. Okay.
Yeah.
You didn't start with espionage.
No, I did not. And I've had several books that were just straight up mysteries. Yeah.
Right. But now you are really firmly in the espionage world.
Yeah.
I feel like that's what drew you there and what keeps you there.
Oddly, it was working on something with David, which didn't draw me there, but pushed me further there because, as you know, we've been working on that for 12, 13 years. The series that will not die. It would be a dramatization of the history of the CIA. And I did the research for that. And I interviewed for that 25, 30 people who had worked for the CIA and the OSS between the years 1946 to about 1968. And I absorbed so much of that and so much of that lore. And I've read so many books, at least 30, 40 books from that whole era, that I'm just steeped in this material now. And I feel like I know it inside out. So every time I have an idea now, it seems like it's coming out of that world. So that's part of the reason why is all the research I did for that.
I'm going to be just, I had really never made the connection that Legacy of Ashes and working on that project, which is what drew you into the espionage world. Because, I mean, I don't, reading you and reading Cover Wife specifically, I was like, I tend not to read a lot of espionage books, and I don't know why.
Yeah.
Because when I read your books, I love them. Mm-hmm. And it's like, why am I not thinking more about spies? And I don't know. I mean, I think spies are really fascinating.
They are. I would not want to write a contemporary spy novel because technology now has so overwhelmed the business with cell phones and satellites and drones and all of that, that I don't want to go there in this period. I much prefer to go back to an era where they had much more relying on their own thinking, their own footwork, old tradecraft. So 1999 is about as up to date as I'm going to get.
Well, I think that's a problem overall in crime fiction. Yeah, where we have these things.
Yeah. How many times can your battery go dead? Yeah.
And like, how are you going to? I keep trying to write around it or trying to write kind of almost smaller stories where they're about people who are so amateurish that, the most they can do is maybe friend somebody on Facebook. And that's their idea of surveillance. They don't know how to do this stuff.
Yeah.
But it's that and now, okay, so you don't have the issue at all. You don't have to deal with whether or not you're going to write about the world during COVID.
No, I'm not.
Because you're so pre that.
In fact, when I wrote Safe Houses, there is a thread, and that was in 2014. But even that, I consciously kept it short of the Trump era because it would have been so hopelessly complicated by that backdrop that I just didn't want to deal with it. So,
yeah, I mean, I've decided that my next book is actually going to take place largely from sort of like 2019 into early 2021, but it doesn't have anything to do with the pandemic. It's just the pandemic is something going on in the background.
Yeah, and it's going to be, that's quite a big influence on the background too.
Yeah, are people wearing masks? Are they, how do you grocery shop? How do you meet up with someone? How do you plan to kill somebody?
Yeah.
I mean, this sounds a little bit flippant, but it's not. Because I'm kind of doing a double indemnity story. And it really did seem to me that by the end of 2020, it would make sense to rationalize, why not murder somebody? Because I live in a country where they just let hundreds of thousands of people die
and also
for reasons.
The opportunities offered by all the isolation of COVID too, I would think would be tempting to some people.
Yeah, I think people got, but also just this idea of when you're living in a place where, I try not to be very political when I talk in public, but I think it's fair to say that through 2020, we lived through a time where human life seemed to be very much politicized.
Yeah, everything. I mean, look at vaccines.
Yeah. Like we're going to talk about everything in terms of politics, like who do you support, and your behavior will follow from that.
Yeah.
And at that point, it's like, I don't know. Why can't I kill somebody?
Yeah.
Why not? It's fair. Oh, but I'm so jealous of you. I can't believe you already have another book done.
Yeah, it's an odd place to be. And it's also the first time where I've finished one and turned it in where I didn't have a very clear idea of what I wanted to write next. And I don't. So, do you always have a clear idea of what you're going to do? Yeah.
But I'm always very, and I think this is our newspaper background again. I don't worry about it.
No, I don't. I'm not worried about it either. I just I know something will come along.
I am completely unromantic about idea generation. It's my job. It's our job. It's like, I need to write a book.
Yeah.
I have a contract. I'm going to come up with a story in which somebody dies.
Yeah. Maybe several people.
maybe more than one, but at least one person will die in this book.
Yeah.
My current book was very much the one that's in progress. It was influenced by a podcast. And it's so obvious when the name of the podcast, which I stole, the name of that episode of the podcast, which I stole for my book, is Prom Mom. Everyone knows what that means. What's
is this the 2020-2021 book?
Well, yeah. But this is the actual prom took place in 1997.
Yeah.
And it's 20 years later, and people are becoming reacquainted. People with weird, complicated histories.
Yeah.
So, boy, it's been kicking my butt pretty hard, actually.
Yeah.
I did not have a problem writing during the pandemic. I don't know about you. I had a problem.
No, not at all.
I had a problem reading.
Oh, really? Well,
Yeah.
I mean, you had a completely different situation. You have a kid school age, and that is a nightmare, or was a nightmare. See, both our kids are out of
Your kids-
college.
well, you had your kids at a normal age, so your kids.
Yeah. But it's just, I had this, if anything, I got more done. And I know writers who have kids are so sick of seeing writers come on and go, I did more good writing than at any time. You know, it's like, yeah, screw you.
You're doing the voice of our former managing editor.
Excellent job, Laura. Yeah.
I mean, I had no problem writing. That part of my focus was available to me.
So why not reading now?
I don't know.
Huh.
It's back though. It's back.
But do you think you're too worn out by that whole school thing and all of that?
I'm not going to blame the school thing. I
wouldn't blame you if you did blame it, but that's.
I think over the past 16, 17 months we've been through, everybody had to kind of park their anxiety somewhere.
Yeah.
And so when I wasn't writing, my mind was pretty jumpy.
Yeah.
And when I wasn't writing or walking, because I became this obsessive walker, listening to podcasts and sometimes listening to audiobooks, but to sit and read became difficult.
Interesting.
But it's a muscle, and as soon as you start doing it again, you're fine.
Yeah.
You're just fine, and I'm pretty much back to it. But there was a time. Look, it's not I couldn't read. I couldn't actually watch TV very much. We watched a lot of movies.
Yeah.
But they tended to be movies I'd seen before. We did kind of a family film festival where someone got to choose. So the rule was really simple. There's 3 of us. Everyone took a turn picking the movie. No one could complain about the movie that was picked.
That's not easy to do.
You weren't allowed to complain. And interestingly, when you say no one can complain, it creates sort of this idea of I should choose very carefully.
Yeah.
And so I'm very proud of the fact that my 11-year-old daughter has seen a lot of really good movies that she appreciates at a level. I mean, like the fact that my kid watched the original taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3.
Oh yeah, that's a great movie.
And she sat there, and there's that freeze frame on Walter Matthau, and she's like, "That is a perfect movie." I'm like, "Yes, it's a perfect movie," and I can't believe they remade it.
Yeah.
She's seen a lot of really good movies, but yeah, I couldn't even watch TV. It was like all of my focus and concentration got used up on writing.
Interesting. Because I found that I changed my reading habits. I found that I cast a wider net going further back, and it's still going. Because, for instance, I just started binging. I've now read 3 novels and a memoir of. I had never read Shirley Hazard. And
I have not read her yet. I know I should.
After I read the first one, I thought, how did I miss this, and why? And so I've read The Great Fire and The Bay of Noon and The Transit of Venus, and her memoir about her and Graham Greene and her husband and their families on Capri, I think it is. And it's just all of it's so wonderful. But so I've kind of gone out into the field to places where I wouldn't have been, because I think I felt more at loose ends, and I wasn't seeing people to kind of say, what are you reading, even though you can go online and do that. So I felt like I had to explore more on my own and look for things. So anyway, it's interesting.
Oh, we have some questions.
Oh, we do. Okay.
We do. We'll take our questions, McKenna. You can ask us our questions.
Hi, I love these conversations when it's 2 people who are clearly friends, because we just feel like we're eavesdropping on your conversation. They're the best events. So this has been super fun. We have some oddly specific questions. Let's see. Why York and Smallbrook Lane?
Which one is?
I don't know.
Is that the only thing I can think of is my previous novel, Safe Houses. There was a scene in York, Pennsylvania.
I'm guessing this is for you then.
And I don't remember Smallbrook Lane, frankly, but it sounds vaguely familiar. And why? I couldn't really tell you. Whatever made me choose that at the time has now gone off into the stratosphere. So I have no idea.
Someone on Twitter today asked me a question about in what novel did so-and-so do such and such? And I'm like,
Oh, that's funny. Okay, so that question, it was funny. That question was like spring loaded. As soon as I hit we're live, like that question popped up. So it must have been something from the past ready to go. So Dan has a compliment to Laura. Laura, these are great questions. My question is, how does Dan Fesperman check on the reality of his female characters?
Meaning their authenticity. It's I've interviewed several women who work for the CIA. There's also a great trove of material. I can't remember the title of it, that the CIA historian has put together of declassified documents. The best one of which was a 24-page transcript of a discussion for CIA women to an operations of the same era as Claire had at headquarters in about 2004. And they were talking about all their problems getting into the field and things like that, basically, just declassified archival material and personal interviews.
All right, and same person. What's the project on the history of the CIA? Is it something that's been published?
Oh, no, it's a project with David Simon and Ed Burns. Laura knows them pretty well, I think. We started on it, I think, 12, 13 years ago. HBO took a pass and the BBC picked it up and loved it and said it was too expensive, and they took a pass, and now then Sky Television picked it up and they want the scripts reworked yet again. And in fact, we went over there in London and had a writer's meeting. It's a dramatization. It's a dramatic series about the history of the CIA, basically, with a lot of British content, since the people now paying the bill are the British.
Perfect. Aaron, I think we will all recognize Aaron's name. Which of your characters do you like the most, and which do you like the least? Let's start with Laura.
Well, I mean, obviously, like Tess Monahan the best. She's a little bit of my doppelganger. And there's some other female characters that I really like. I really like the main character in Know You Anywhere. And I love all of the women in After I'm Gone. I would have to say the characters, I mean, I probably dislike Jerry Anderson more than any other character I've ever written. Although I agree with him on a lot of things, but yeah, he's horrible. He's awful.
That didn't show at all. That's like that.
Your turn, Dan.
I must like Claire the best because she's the first one I've used in 3 books. Although I think this character in this next book that I was just talking about, this East German character, even though he's a high up spy in the Stasi, his name is Emil Grimm, and I'm really quite taken by him. Characters I like the least. There was a fellow in my second book who was a war criminal. I think he's probably the worst. So.
Fair enough. Okay, for Laura specifically, are you going to write something set in New Orleans?
Well, New Orleans is really tricky. New Orleans is really tricky, and if you know people there, they are so judgmental about getting stuff wrong. It happens in the book that I'm working on. There's a character who grew up in New Orleans, but who's living in Baltimore. I think I can pull that off. And it's formidable. It's formidable. I mean, I feel that the bar is so high. So this is my favorite story about New Orleans and how many layers of society there are. When we lived there, and we lived there for 5 years, for 6 months out of the year, and I went to this gym uptown with a lot of uptown ladies, but I knew I was not of them. I was just at their gym taking classes with them. And one day I showed up at the gym to take a class, and like there was only one other lady there and nobody else was there. And like the regular teacher wasn't there because all of the true New Orleanians were attending the funeral of one of the McElhennys of McElhenney, Tabasco.
Yeah.
It was like I'm so not part of it. I'm not even at the good funeral. It's thick and it is layered and it is intense and I don't really understand it. I've got like like this really superficial knowledge of New Orleans, it would be hard for me to write about it in a meaningful way.
That's interesting because Baltimore, I didn't grow up in Baltimore like you did, but I've been here for, God, since 84 now, with 3 years overseas in between. And I found Baltimore was one of those instantly welcoming places, which was happy to let you in on its secrets. And, you know, as long as you learn things like when somebody says, where did you go to school? They mean high school, not your college. You know, once you start figuring things like that out, it's a really comfortable place for outsiders to feel at home.
I mean, New Orleans is a great place to live, and they're very welcoming, and they're very loving, and they're very generous. But if you try to write about it, you're really opening yourself up to get a lot of stuff wrong.
Yeah. But it's funny, all the stuff you had about Liz, my wife, who works at the Sun, and she grew up, you know, near that Baskin Robbins 31 Flavors, the Morgan Millard, which is now So, you know, I was seeing all this stuff through her eyes and her stories as a kid. I'm like, oh yeah, and Berwick and Point Sledding and all that. I was seeing all of that through stories I've heard from her. So, you know, it was quite interesting. You know, she probably you know, someone she knew might have been the one who came along and hit Jerry on his sled. You know, had he not turned in time.
That's funny. Okay, for those of you who are watching, if you have more questions, go ahead and pop them in here. I'm going to ask a couple. So I love asking this question. What books did you read in your formative years? And was there a particular book that made you want to be a writer? And let's start with Dan this time.
It's interesting. Formative years as a reader didn't occur until high school, because until then I read a lot of schlock and I read a lot of sports books, and you know, I liked the Hardy Boys, but I kind of resisted a lot of academic reading. And then when I was in 11th grade, I took a course called Bestsellers, and I've since been in touch with a teacher, and she had Eldridge Cleaver's Soul on Ice, 2 Kurt Vonnegut books, a book called Five Smooth Stones, and I can't remember the 5th book, but reading Slaughterhouse-Five, I had never read anything like it. It was so fresh and original, and I went out that summer and binged on everything Kurt Vonnegut had written. And from then on, I was a binge reader. I'd find an author I liked, and I'd have to be a completist. And so those were kind of the books I read in my formative years as a reader, which is, I know it's late developing, but you know, that we were read to a lot as a kid. My sister and I, my mom would read to us a lot of great old stories, you know, Tom Sawyer, books like that. So I had all these rhythms of language in my head and was really susceptible to it, but I really didn't become a big reader until high school.
And was there a book that made you think, I want to be a journalist, I want to be a writer? I started working for the student newspaper at North Carolina for the Daily Tar Heel, and I just had a blast. And it was this great thing to go intrude on people's lives and ask them whatever you wanted, and they kind of felt like they had to answer your questions. And I have a lot of curiosity, and it was just wonderful being able to go out and do that and find out what was really going on. So many times as a journalist, you find out what's really going on, and you still can't really write that story because if you don't have it solid enough, or they've told you off the record, or really the only way you can figure out what's really going on is kind of guesswork, but you can't put that in story. So just having that ability to go around and get in other people's business like that is why I got into that. Yeah. Excellent. How about you, Laura?
Well, I was definitely a very traditional young reader. I loved the Betsy Tacy books. I loved Anne of Green Gables, Harriet the Spy. So I'm like trying to write novels when I'm 11, 12 years old, doing very poorly, but trying, because I'm reading these books about girls who want to write. And then I'm also, though, just to be really honest, I'm just really interested in smut. I'm like this little smut detective. So I'm reading Peyton Place, I'm reading Valley of the Dolls. And those books are unfortunately formative. I mean, they're not great books to be your formative books, and yet they are part of what formed me. I wanted to mention, because Dan spoke of both Tom Sawyer and Kurt Vonnegut, one of the podcasts I listen to when I write is with Marlon James and his editor, Jake. Who's
I love Marlon James. Yeah.
They do a podcast where they only talk about dead writers.
Yeah.
I think it's called Marlon and Jake Talk About Dead Writers.
Yeah.
And just this week they were talking about how do we deal with books by terrible people. And I don't think Vonnegut but what they got into this side discussion about how they both think Tom Sawyer is a better book than Huck Finn, and I kind of do too.
Yeah, I kind of do too.
And it's like I felt so seen at this moment of, yeah, I think Tom Sawyer's the better book, and we're not allowed to say that, but maybe it is.
Yeah.
It was a great conversation.
Yeah, I love. I'm trying to think of the name. A short history of 7 deaths. The Marlon James book.
Oh yeah. That's the one he won the Booker for.
Right. Goodness, right? What an incredible book! It's got like 23 different points of view. It's written in patois. It's just
this podcast. It makes me so happy, and it makes me feel so dumb because you just sort of feel like Marlon James has read everything in the world.
Yeah, you get that idea. Yeah.
And he'll say, no one really needs to read anything except Moby Dick. But he's read everything.
Yeah. No. It's funny that all of those like Beverly Cleary books, I discovered all of those classic books.
Reading to your kids?
My kids. And they're wonderful. And I love the Ramona books. The Beverly Cleary.
Don't even get me started on the obituary for Beverly Cleary and how Ramona was libeled in the New York Times as being difficult. And I was like, no, she was a kid saying this because she's a girl.
Yeah.
But, it's funny because I'm in that. I mean, my daughter's only 11. She doesn't want to read anything that I love. She just, which is cool. I know that kids have to discover their own beloved books, but she doesn't read Beverly Cleary. She doesn't read Edward Eger, who was an essential writer to me.
And did she? Yeah, I remember.
Half Magic.
Yeah.
One of them, it's like none of the books that I really, but she's finding her own books, which is cool too. It's just, I was like, I wish she would read the books I loved.
No, but it's great that she's a reader because I know some writers have kids and they're not readers, and I think it's really kind of painful. Not because they don't read their books, because they don't read anything. But
that would be terrible.
Both our kids are huge readers, and it's really comforting. So.
Yeah,
Laura, you should just count your victory with the movie taste that's developing. Like, seems like she's appreciating that element, and let her have her own books. Yeah, I still can't believe she's 11. Actually, when you said that blows my mind.
What movies did she pick for movie week?
That's a good question. What are some of the movies she picked? And I'm not going to come up with anything off the top of my head. My memory is so bad. But she's good. She has good taste in movies. She likes a lot of romantic comedies.
Yeah.
She loves the movie Pitch Perfect, which I think is a pretty fun, good movie. She's good gosh, I'm just not going to remember. I feel so dumb.
Does she watch stuff like Succession? Does she watch
Although I'm extremely excited about the third.
I am too. I've already watched the
love that show.
Yeah.
She watched Jaws, and this is like one of her little moments of infamy. So I was watching Jaws with Georgia Ray, and I thought she was going to be scared by it, and she's just not. And the moment comes where that poor little boy on the raft is just snapped in two, and this blood, rises in the air like a plume. Yeah. And Georgia Ray screamed out, "Fruit punch." And I tweeted that, like, my daughter's watching Jaws and she just saw the kid snapped in half, and her reaction was to scream out, "Fruit punch." And Stephen King retweeted Georgia. I was like, she's very proud that Stephen King thought she was funny. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Well, we let our kids, when they were growing up, especially by the time our son came along, we pretty much let him watch anything he wanted to watch. It wasn't no pornography or anything. We don't have that in the house, but he was watching Chinatown when he was 10 and things like that. And
Yeah, it's she can handle a lot. I will say
Yeah.
she hasn't watched Chinatown yet, but maybe she's ready.
Yeah.
Are there
slapping you saying, "My daughter, my grand."
Are there any books that you've read recently that either one of you want to give a shout out to? And that'll be my last question, then we can wrap up. Laura's nodding. You go first.
Immediately. I have just stumbled on the incredible trilogy of what are called autobiographies in process by Deborah Levy, a British writer. The first one's called Things I Didn't Want to Know. The second one is The Cost of Living. And the third one is Real Estate. These are these slender, tight, beautiful, and she's an amazing writer. She's been shortlisted for the Booker, but these sort of autobiographies, maybe there's a little autofiction in there. They're so beautiful. I'm so in love with them.
What's her name?
Deborah Levy.
Deborah Levy. Okay. How about you, Dan?
I would second the motion I made earlier about Shirley Hazard. I know they're not out of print. They're still around. And I would start with The Transit of Venus. It's just a wonderful book. And I also recently finished my binge of Mick Herron, who
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow. Mick Herron's
wonderfully witty and entertaining. I just love those books. So, yeah.
Yep. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we have done the thing. We've talked about all the books. It's been great listening to you two. I will mention again that Cover Wife and Dream Girl are out this week, and we are so excited about them. Congrats to both of you. As you both know, I mean, I've been a fan of both of yours forever, and a new book is always just a treat. Thank you for being here, and thanks to those of you watching. I'm going to go ahead and sign us off for the evening and pour myself a glass of wine. Bye.
Bye. This is a pleasure.
It was
Thank
great.
you so much.
Thanks, both of you.
Thank you both.
Bye-bye.